The desert doesn't care about your ambition. That's what I've learned in the years since I left my old life behind. Stood up and walked away from the meticulously polished existence I'd built with Catherine. Our loft apartment in the revitalized downtown district, the kind of place with exposed brick, a smart thermostat, and a view of the city lights that made you feel like you were holding a piece of the sky. The heat just keeps coming, indifferent to whether you're climbing or collapsing. There's a brutal honesty in that, eventually. I stand on the cracked asphalt of a remote highway rest stop in Nevada, the air conditioner of my vintage Airstream sputtering behind me. I'm nursing a lukewarm bottle of water, watching the shimmering distortion rise off the pavement. The sky is a blinding, relentless blue, and somewhere beyond the scrub brush, a semi-truck groans into life. My satellite phone, a piece of necessary paranoia, vibrates in my palm. It's Merrick, my former head of security, confirming the schedule for the next quarterly board meeting. All systems nominal, Raiden. Just your signature needed on the P&L review by EOD. So formal, these communications now, as if I'm a silent partner, a ghost in the machine of the tech empire I built from nothing. I founded Ether Solutions, but for the last year, I've only managed it remotely, an invisible hand on the tiller. I don't reply immediately. Instead, I let myself remember when I first noticed something had shifted between us, about 9 months before I walked away. It was at the Gala for Future Innovations, a black-tie benefit for the institute Catherine chaired. One of those carefully curated events where conversations are about disruptive technology and philanthropic legacy. I was by the bar, talking to a venture capitalist whose fund was trying to buy a piece of Ether, when Catherine's laugh, a sound like glass chimes, cut through the ambient murmur. A specific laugh, one I hadn't heard since our early, starving days in that tiny garage office. It had a sharp, challenging edge to it, like she'd been genuinely provoked. I found her near the main entrance, standing a little too close to a man I didn't recognize. Silas Thorne, though I wouldn't learn his name or significance until later. He was the head of a rival data analytics firm, showing her something on his phone, the screen angled to catch the stage lights. He was talking about a zero-day vulnerability he'd discovered, gesturing with one hand while the other remained a respectful but significant distance from her lower back, occupying the same zone of influence. The whole was impossible, he was saying, his voice a low, confident rumble. The kind of thing you're certain you've imagined until you look at the source code afterward. Catherine touched her clavicle, a gesture I knew well. Her tell when she was mentally captivated. "You really should come speak at the Institute, Silas," she said, though in 15 years of partnership, she'd never once suggested involving a direct business competitor in her work. The world opens up when you decide to examine the infrastructure. I stood at the edge of the crowd, a glass of lukewarm champagne dangling, forgotten from my fingers, and watched my wife lean forward slightly, drawn by the gravitational pull of a different, more dangerous kind of power. Later, in the chauffeured car ride home, she was unusually energized. "You okay?" I asked, my eyes on the passing neon signs. "Do you ever feel like we're just managing the quarterly report?" she said, staring out the tinted window. "What do you mean? Like we're still pretending to be visionary leaders, going through the motions, galas and board meetings and comparing Q3 revenue projections?" I could have asked what she wanted instead. I could have admitted that sometimes, lying awake at night in our soundproof loft, I wondered if we'd become the kind of people we once swore we wouldn't, corporate automatons defined by our net worth. Instead, I said, well, I did convince that VC to back off, so clearly my negotiation skills are improving. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You're good at making the empire seem stable. One of us has to be," I said lightly, and she turned back to the window. That's how we'd always operated. Her restlessness, my engineering, her seeking the edge, my anchoring the center. For years, it had been a balance that created billions, until suddenly it didn't. But I didn't understand that yet. I ignored the other signs, too. The sudden, obsessive focus on competitive analysis reports, the new, slightly edgier wardrobe that seemed off from her usual, minimalist style. The encrypted message notifications she'd check and then place her phone face down. The late nights at the institute that coincided with her taking on a new, high-profile data security initiative, a project to safeguard the city's core infrastructure. When I found the cryptocurrency wallet ledger while reviewing her personal finances, it was almost a relief, confirmation I wasn't inventing problems. The paper was crisp between my fingers, folded neatly inside her favorite leather portfolio. A substantial transfer to an untraceable offshore account on a Tuesday when she'd told me she was attending a closed-door symposium that ran long. I returned it exactly as I'd found it, smoothing the crease with my thumbnail. That night, I lay awake beside her sleeping form, cataloging possible explanations that didn't involve corporate espionage or organized betrayal. A secret investment she was planning, a private fund for a sensitive project, a safety net she'd set up for the future. I'd always been good at constructing narratives that allowed us both to avoid confrontation. It was a skill I'd perfected in my early days as a programmer, debugging faulty code by creating layers of plausible functionality on top of a core error. I learned then that sometimes silence is the only leverage you have. The ability to pretend you don't see what's happening until you're ready to face it. But the weight of unasked questions was changing me. I moved through our highly secure loft like an investigator, searching for evidence while simultaneously hiding my investigation. I'd become a stranger in my own marriage, monitoring my wife for clues about the unseen architecture of her new life. And through it all, we continued our routines, public appearances, quarterly performance reviews, and evening rituals with the latest financial news. I'd like to say I was staying silent to gather courage for an inevitable confrontation. But the truth is simpler and more cowardly. I was afraid of what would happen when there were no more excuses left between us. The fault line. The following Saturday, light streamed through the automated blackout blinds of the living room, catching in the dust motes of the uncleaned air. Catherine was on a video conference, impeccably dressed, talking to a reporter about the ethical deployment of AI. "Raiden, can we upgrade my VR rig yet?" Jax asked, appearing beside me as I reviewed a complex data visualization on my tablet. Jax was my 15-year-old nephew, who'd lived with us since his parents moved overseas. He was already a formidable, if slightly chaotic, coder. "Still working on Catherine," I said, scrolling past a troubling spike in server usage. Complex negotiations take time, especially on hardware budgeting. From behind her massive monitor, Catherine said, her voice carrying a practiced, authoritative clarity. "Your uncle thinks he's being diplomatic, but what he means is he's the one who'd end up troubleshooting the crashes." "I would help," Jax insisted. "I'd debug it every night. I'd even optimize the memory allocation." "Bold claim," I said, sitting down on the Italian leather sofa. "Let's revisit this when you remember to delete the malware from your downloads folder instead of leaving it for the firewall." Jax sighed dramatically, then brightened. "Can we go to the old data recovery warehouse today? I finished the last of the legacy server archives." "Actually," Catherine said, signing off her call with a flourish. "I was thinking Jax and I could have an institute day. An unscheduled tour of the new data center, lunch at that expensive place with the good sushi, maybe some recruitment strategy planning." Jax's face lit up. Can we go to the electronics surplus store, too? I need a new logic analyzer for my project. Whatever you want, kiddo. Catherine's smile was warm, but her eyes briefly met mine with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Let's make it strategic. Now, standing by my battered Airstream a year later, I understand what that look meant. She was calculating her resources, knowing she'd need his loyalty during her absence. She was saying goodbye while pretending it was just another Saturday. After that weekend, I retreated to my refuge, Ether Solutions. The company occupied the top 2 floors of the city's most secure tower, a space defined by minimalist design and state-of-the-art encryption. My grandfather had founded a small circuit board repair shop. My father reluctantly managed it before abandoning both it and us for a life of obscure philosophy and substance abuse. I had rescued it from near bankruptcy after college, reimagining its core mission. Its history mirrored my own. Obligations inherited, choices made reluctantly, then embraced with a vengeance. A place defined by both legacy and reinvention. You look like someone just zeroed out your entire database, Maya said, appearing beside me as I arranged a new display of network schematics on the central project wall. Maya was my COO, and she had an uncanny ability to sense when I needed distraction. Just overloaded, I replied, straightening a stack of server logs. Jax had a bad dream last night. Maya studied me over the rim of her sleek, augmented reality glasses. You're doing that thing with your index finger. What thing? That taping thing that means you're either planning a hostile takeover or about to delete half the company's code. I consciously relaxed my hand. It's nothing. Catherine's leaving for Zurich tomorrow. A 3-week data compliance summit. Just thinking about managing a multinational corporation and a gifted, unstable teenager while she was gone. Maya nodded slowly. You know I can help with Jax if you need. He can hang out in the cafeteria after school, work on his coding at one of the silent booths. I appreciate that, I said, genuinely grateful for her friendship. Maya had been there through every crisis of my adult life. My father's institutionalization, the early, frantic years of Ether, the time the company nearly got sued out of existence. She knew when to push and when to let things be. How about I bring over some of those high-caffeine energy bars you like when I clock out? We can complain about regulatory bodies and you can tell me what's really bothering you. I managed a thin smile. Rain check. I should probably be home early tonight since Catherine's leaving tomorrow. After work, I picked up Jax from his advanced robotics club, listening to his chatter about the day's successes. The optimized gear ratio, the successful servo test, the 6 new integrated circuits he'd scored at the surplus store. He was luminous with intellectual energy, and I felt a stab of something like protective fear. Not of the attention Catherine gave him, but of Jax's unquestioning certainty that his world was solid and permanent. At home, Catherine was packing, her custom titanium suitcase open on our minimalist platform bed like a mouth waiting to be fed. Zurich in November, she said when I appeared in the doorway. I packed 3 power suits and still feel underprepared. You hate the cold, I said, watching her fold a hand-stitched blazer I'd never seen before, deep obsidian silk that would bring out the fierce intelligence in her eyes. I'll survive. The Institute is funding a massive security audit for this project. The board says if we land it, I'm up for an executive director role. Silas, her rival, who I'd only met once at a professional event, a man with aggressive intellectual arrogance and strategic data breaches. I'd never fully trusted him, but now I wondered if that distrust had been misplaced. Perhaps Silas Thorne wasn't the one I should have been watching. Jax had a good time today, I said. He's growing up so fast. His mind is already 3 steps ahead of mine. Catherine's hands paused on a shirt. Sometimes I look at him and can't believe we're responsible for that much raw potential. He's becoming someone new every day. That's what people do, I said more sharply than I intended. Catherine gave me a long look. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I sighed. Just overloaded. Need help with anything. The moment passed, tension dissolving into routine. We ordered takeout, helped Jax organize his circuit board inventory, watched a documentary about the physics of deep space we followed together. A normal corporate family evening, the kind that made up the predictable algorithm of our lives. But beneath it all ran a current of wrongness I couldn't name. Like a system parameter shifted slightly in a familiar piece of code, just enough to make the entire structure unstable. That night, after Jax was asleep, Catherine came to bed with an intensity that surprised me. Her hands traced the lines on my face as if memorizing its geometry. And when we made love, she kept her eyes open, watching me with an expression that seemed almost like archival regret. Afterward, she curled against me, her head on my chest where she could hear the steady thrum of my engineer's heartbeat. "I love you," she said so quietly I almost missed it. "I love you, too," I replied automatically, stroking her hair. In the dark, with her breathing slowly evening into sleep, I catalogued the emotions swirling beneath my ribs. Concern, confusion, a dull algorithmic anger I wasn't ready to acknowledge, and beneath it all, fear. Not just of what might be happening, but of confronting it, of becoming the person who asks questions that can't be unasked. In the false narrative I was telling myself, doubt was just another form of commitment, the willingness to look away to preserve what mattered. I didn't yet understand that some forms of preservation are actually slow system failure. That silence can be its own kind of digital betrayal. The unveiling. 3 days into Catherine's trip, I was reviewing the Ether security firewall logs when my satellite phone rang. The caller ID showed her institute office number, and I felt a spike of anxiety before answering. Raiden, it's Eliza from Catherine's office. Her voice had the over-compressed quality people use when something's wrong, but they're trying to sound normal. Sorry to bother you, but is Catherine feeling better? The audit team was wondering when she'll be back. My hand tightened on the phone. Back from Zurich, you mean? A beat of silence. Zurich. She called in sick on Monday. Said she had that 24-hour bug that's going around. The one that causes temporary vision problems. I turned away from the systems architect browsing nearby, lowering my voice. There must be some confusion. She left Sunday for a 3-week data compliance summit in Zurich for the infrastructure project. Another pause, longer this time. Raiden, we filed that compliance report last month. We didn't get the contract. Silas Thorne's firm undercut our bid. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I mumbled something about miscommunication. Promised to have Catherine call and hung up. For several minutes, I stood motionless in the server room, a diagnostic report dangling, forgotten from my hand, while my mind raced through possibilities, each more implausible than the last. A secret project, a misunderstanding between departments, an elaborate surprise involving an acquisition. But beneath these desperate rationalizations, a colder truth was taking shape, one built from the undeniable data points, the missing contract, the sick call, the untraceable crypto transfer. That evening, after leaving Gavin, my assistant manager, to oversee the night shift, I began my real investigation. The Zurich Intercontinental Hotel confirmed they had no reservation under Catherine's name. The city's private air service had no record of her on any flight to Europe. Her secure biometric thumb drive was gone from our safe, along with specific, high-value legacy data assets from her locked file cabinet, Not the haphazard selection of someone packing in a hurry, but carefully chosen pieces, as if for a curated capsule of leverage. Most telling of all was the missing hard copy of the Ether server schematics from our fireproof vault, a document unnecessary for a domestic compliance summit. Jax was at his robotics competition for the night, a standing monthly arrangement that now seemed suspiciously convenient. Alone in the loft, I moved from room to room with growing dread, seeing our shared life through a forensic lens. The framed photograph from our IPO celebration where Catherine's smile seemed calculated in retrospect. The careful organization of her digital workspace where her most sensitive project files were missing. The final piece of evidence was in her dedicated work drawer. I found it beneath the Ether founding documents. A handwritten note on the Institute stationery she used for important correspondence, hidden beneath tax documents I'd never have reason to look at while she was supposedly away for just 3 weeks. I need to know if the risk is worth the reward. 5 words. Her handwriting unusually messy, as if written in haste or emotion. Not "I need more than this" or "there has to be more than this," statements of certainty. But "I need to know," the appeal of someone testing a hypothesis, conducting an experiment whose parameters included my ignorance and trust. That night, I sat on our platform bed, my bed now, at least temporarily, holding her specialized e-reader in my lap. The house was abnormally quiet, the kind of silence that feels like pressure against your neural network. A memory surfaced. My mother sitting just like this on the night my father disappeared, her face carefully blank as she told 7-year-old me that sometimes people needed distance to redefine their algorithm, that it didn't mean they didn't love us. 35 years later, I finally understood the courage it took for her to remain still instead of screaming or breaking things. The superhuman effort of containing an explosion so her child wouldn't be wounded by the shrapnel. I didn't sleep. Instead, I moved through the loft, collecting the data I'd been avoiding for months. Encrypted communications showing contact with Silas Thorne that spanned 6 months. High-value data transfer. Logs to an unknown external drive on nights she was supposedly working late. A recent purchase order for a high-security satellite link, a system necessary for remote, clandestine operations. By morning, I had constructed the skeleton of the truth, though many details remained shadowy. The precise nature of her arrangement with Silas, how long it had been ongoing, whether she intended to return, what false narrative she would spin for Jax and me, when she did. That night, I learned that betrayal has a sound, the perfect silence of questions you never thought to ask. The thing about digital betrayal is that it leaves an immutable record. We live so much of our lives online that disappearing completely requires either extraordinary technical preemption or a level of pathological planning that borders on the superhuman. Catherine had the technical skill, but she seemed to have underestimated my own. In the gray, pre-dawn light, Jax still safely at his competition, I sat at our shared desktop workstation. We'd bought it together 5 years ago, agreeing it would live in the small server alcove off the main living space, neutral territory, not quite my office or hers. I rarely used it, preferring my secured laptop for Ether's proprietary systems. Catherine used it for institute projects, complex financial modeling, and our joint life planning. I typed in the password we shared, the binary equivalent of our wedding date, followed by the street number of our first garage office. The screen blinked awake, displaying a desktop background of the 3 of us at the Silicon Valley Pioneers retreat last year, squinting into the Northern California fog. I looked at our pixelated smiles and wondered if Catherine was already running her escape algorithm when that photo was taken. Her browser history had been cleared, but the Institute's financial portal remembered her login. 2 first-class, one-way tickets to Singapore, purchased 4 days before her alleged business trip. One in her name, one in the name Silas Thorne. A week-long booking at a serviced apartment complex known for its anonymity. The clinical details of betrayal laid out in a clean, data-driven interface. I sat back, suddenly depressurized. Not just an affair, then, not just a clandestine meeting during a long lunch, but something premeditated, something that required international travel and corporate-level planning and 6,000 miles of distance. Something that felt less like a moment of weakness and more like a deliberate strategic choice. My hands hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. There was still a line I hadn't crossed, the invasion of her private communications. But that boundary seemed absurd now, a polite fiction in a relationship already shattered by system-level security breaches. I accessed her tablet, plugged it into my custom-built forensics rig, and found what I was looking for in her forgotten, non-encrypted email account. The exchanges between them stretched back 6 months. The initial messages were professional. He'd consulted on a security review for her firm, was sending vulnerability reports for her analysis. Then coffee to discuss a potential data-sharing collaboration. Then conversations that spilled beyond work into intellectual, personal territory. Theoretical physics concepts they both loved, unsolved data mysteries he'd obsessed over. Her childhood dream of becoming a pure mathematician before she settled for applied tech. I've never told anyone that before, she wrote. Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I'd followed the raw theorem instead of the application. It's never too late to pivot to pure theory, he replied with the casual certainty of someone who'd never considered not following an intellectual impulse. The mind is the only true constant. I scrolled through months of their intellectual courtship developing in plain sight, hidden only by my trust and inattention. The first time they met outside of work. The first oblique reference to feelings beyond professional respect. The gradual shift in tone from cautious to intimate to urgent, a slow, calculated escalation. Then, 3 weeks ago, a pivot. What if we just went? Not forever, just a month. Singapore, maybe Hong Kong, perhaps a hidden data haven. No plans, no reservations beyond the first week. Just us seeing what intellectual synthesis is possible together. Her response came 2 days later. I can't just leave my life. I have Jack's, the Institute, my entire legacy. I'm not asking for a sacrifice. Just a month to explore who you might be outside of wife and executive and institute director. A month to remember the person who wanted to solve Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Bile rose in my throat as I read her final email to him, sent the day before she left. 1 month. I'll tell them it's the summit. When we get back, I'll figure out what I want. But I need this. I need to know who I am when I'm not being the stable force everyone expects me to be. I closed the tablet and went to the bathroom, where I was violently sick. Afterward, I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection. The man looking back at me seemed like a stranger, hollow-eyed, pale, someone who'd just discovered the core operating system of his life had been compromised. The worst part wasn't that she'd left. It wasn't even that she'd lied. It was the revelation that while I'd been building our unified field, brick by carefully coded brick, she'd been secretly wondering if she'd chosen the wrong theorem. That while I'd been content with the proof, she'd been calculating escape routes. By the time I picked up Jax from his competition that afternoon, I'd composed myself enough to maintain the fiction that everything was running within parameters. I answered his questions about the robotics judging with vague details about international data standards and long flights, all while Jax chatted excitedly about the successful code execution and the new trophy. Auntie Catherine said to tell you she'll call tonight, Jax said as we drove home. Do you think she's having fun in Zurich? I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'm sure she's deeply focused on the compliance issues. I miss her already, Jax said, looking out the window at the passing city. 3 weeks is a really long time to be off-grid. It'll fly by before you know it, I said, the lie bitter on my tongue. That night, after Jax was asleep, I received a text from Catherine. Miss you both. Zurich is freezing. Project going well, but long days. Tell Jay his robot was brilliant. Talk tomorrow. I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decipher what it meant that she was maintaining the illusion, even in private communication. Was it guilt, self-preservation, or was she texting from some penthouse in Singapore, Silas beside her, both of them laughing at how easily I'd been socially engineered? I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a single malt whiskey I didn't really want and sat in our darkened living room, surrounded by the artifacts of our shared history. Our patent certificates, Jax's first working circuit board, the ugly kinetic sculpture a client had given us that we kept out of obligation. All these objects suddenly seemed like museum pieces, carefully preserved relics of a system no longer living. That night, I slept on the sofa, unwilling to return to our bed. Sometime before dawn, I made a decision. I would not confront her via text. I would not demand explanations from 6,000 miles away. I would wait for her return, for her to face me and Jax and the wreckage she'd left behind. And then we would see what, if anything, could be salvaged. But as the days passed, as I moved through the motions of work and parenting and maintaining the fiction that Catherine was exactly where she claimed to be, something shifted inside me. The initial shock crystallized into a cold, hard clarity. I found myself watching Jax, his absolute trust that his world was stable. His certainty that both his guardians were exactly who he believed us to be. And I understood that the real betrayal wasn't against me. It was against his fragile sense of order. A week after Catherine left, I received another text. Project taking longer than expected. Need to stay another week. Can you handle the systems? We'll make it up to both of you when I'm back. That was when I knew with absolute certainty that she had no intention of returning when she'd originally claimed. That 3 weeks had always been a fiction, a placeholder to buy time while she explored what was possible with Silas. That she expected me to wait patiently, maintaining our life in suspended animation until she decided whether or not she wanted to claim it again. And something in me, something I hadn't known existed, an engineer's instinct for radical re-optimization, quietly, decisively activated. The new protocol. Uncle Raiden, are we really going to visit Grandpa Thomas? Jax asked from the back seat, his voice carrying a note of system suspicion. We rarely visit him, a fact you're old enough to have noticed. We really are, I said, checking the rearview mirror to see him frowning at his tablet. He's looking forward to seeing your robotics trophy. Does he even remember what I look like? The question landed like a small, sharp stone in my chest. Of course he does. He has your code analysis certificate on his wall. Jax made a non-committal data sound and returned to his game. I couldn't blame his skepticism. Thomas Miller had been at best a sporadic presence in my life and consequently in Jax's. After leaving my mother and me when I was 7, he'd maintained just enough contact to technically qualify as present. Holiday video calls, occasional weekend visits that grew less frequent as I entered adolescence, a check for my college tuition that arrived with a terse note about architecting your own reality. I hadn't planned to visit him today, but after a sleepless night considering my options, what to tell Jax about Catherine's extended absence, how to maintain the facade of normalcy when I felt anything but normal, I found myself craving something I couldn't quite name. Not advice exactly, but perhaps perspective from the only other person who might understand what it meant to have the certainty of your life's code suddenly revoked. Thomas lived an hour outside the city in a modest, isolated cabin with a meticulously maintained amateur radio array. At 72, he'd grown leaner, but no less imposing, still ramrod straight, still with the military precision in his movements that had made him seem like a visiting operative in our chaotic household when I was a child. "You should have called first," he said by way of greeting, but he was already bending to Jax's level. "Look who's gotten taller since the summer quarterly. You must be what, 16 now?" Jax giggled despite himself. "I'm 15, Grandpa. I passed my certification exam." "Look, 15. That can't be right. When I was 15, I was already optimizing my first transceiver." He straightened, nodding at me. "Raiden." "Dad," I replied, the word still feeling formal in my mouth. Inside, his house was exactly as I remembered it, impeccably clean, sparsely decorated, with nothing out of place. The opposite of the lived-in complexity of the loft I shared with Catherine and Jax. Here, everything had its designated frequency and purpose. Even the few short-wave communication trophies displayed on the mantel were arranged with geometric precision. While Jax explored the backyard where my father had recently installed a new low-frequency antenna, he and I sat at his kitchen table with mugs of herbal tea neither of us particularly wanted. "So," he said after an awkward silence, "this is unexpected. Jax is supposed to be at the competition. He had an optional recovery day today." The lie came easily, another in the growing collection I'd accumulated in the past week. "Catherine couldn't take him. Catherine's in Zurich. Compliance Summit." He nodded slowly. Another silence stretched between us, this one waited with unasked questions. Finally, he said, "You look like I did the week before I decommissioned your mother's communications." The words hit me like a physical blow. In 30 years, we had never directly discussed his departure. Not the reasons behind it, not the aftermath, not what it had done to my mother and me. It was the negative space around which our entire relationship had been structured. "Is that what this is about?" he continued, his voice matter of fact. "You're thinking of leaving?" "No," I said sharply, then more quietly. "The opposite, actually." She left. Understanding dawned in his expression. "Huh." That single syllable contained multitudes. Recognition, a hint of sympathy, and something else I couldn't quite identify, the grim validation of someone whose cold worldview has been confirmed by data. "How did you know?" I asked, the question escaping before I could consider whether I wanted the answer. When your mother was, I glanced toward the window where Jax was adjusting the antenna, carefully checking the SWR. When things weren't right, my father's hands, large, calloused from decades of radio engineering, wrapped around his mug. Little things at first. Encryption keys she suddenly changed. A new interest in her appearance that had nothing to do with me. The way she'd check her watch during family dinners. He paused. But mostly it was the way she looked at me when she thought I couldn't see her. Like she was trying to reconcile the life she had with the frequency she thought she deserved. I flinched. The description matched perfectly with what I'd been seeing in Catherine for months. The appraising glances, the calculations I could almost see running behind her eyes. "Your mother wasn't discreet," he continued. "Or perhaps I wasn't as oblivious as she hoped. Either way, by the time I found actual evidence, I'd known for months." "So, you left." I couldn't keep the accusation from my voice. "You abandoned us." "I left her," he corrected. "I tried to take you with me." This was new information, a revision to the story I'd carried my whole life. "What? Your mother fought for full custody." Given what I knew about her activities, I could have contested it. "Made things ugly." But you were 7, already confused enough. He shrugged, a gesture that failed to convey the casualness he clearly intended. I made a choice. The wrong one, I said, the old anger rising despite my best efforts to suppress it. Probably, he agreed, surprising me. I've made a lot of those. But at the time, it seemed like the only way to give you some operational stability. One household, one set of rules. No shuttling back and forth between parents who couldn't stand each other. I wanted to challenge him, to point out the flaws in his reasoning. But Jax chose that moment to race back inside, cheeks flushed with excitement. Uncle Raiden, Grandpa, my feed line is optimized. The SWR is near perfect. The conversation was effectively ended. For the next hour, we listened to Jax's enthusiastic recounting of his engineering observations, ate the lunch my father prepared, sandwiches with the crusts meticulously removed, carrot sticks arranged in perfect parallel lines, and maintained the fiction that this was just a normal family audit. As we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside while Jax gathered his things. "Whatever's happening with Catherine," he said quietly, "remember that Jax needs at least one parent he can rely on for system redundancy." "Absolutely. Be that anchor, Raiden." The advice stung with its implication that I might follow his example, that abandonment was a hereditary flaw, a pattern I might unconsciously repeat. But beneath my reflexive defensiveness, I recognized the truth in his words and the depth of his regret. "I'm not you," I said. "No," he agreed, something like pride flickering across his features. "You're better than I was. You always chose the complex integrity solution." The drive home was quieter, Jax tired from the day's activities. As we neared our neighborhood, he looked up from his tablet. "Uncle Raiden, is Auntie Catherine really coming home next week?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Why do you ask?" He shrugged, his small shoulders rising and falling beneath his seat belt. "Just running a contingency simulation." I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his face serious in the fading afternoon light. "What would you think if she needed to stay a little longer for her work?" Jax considered this, his brow furrowing in the exact way Catherine's did when she was thinking deeply. "I'd be disappointed, but I guess it would be okay if it's mission critical." He paused. "Are you disappointed that she's gone?" "Sometimes," I admitted, navigating the careful line between honesty and system protection. "But I'm always focused when I'm with you." He seemed satisfied with this answer, returning to his game. But his question lingered, demanding a more complete response than I could give her. Was I disappointed? Yes, but not in the simple way he meant. I was disappointed for what had been lost, for the version of our partnership I'd believed in until a week ago. But beneath the disappointment was something else taking shape, a determination I barely recognized in myself. My father's words echoed. Jax needs at least one parent he can rely on. I would be that parent. Whatever happened next, whatever choices Catherine made upon her return, I would be the constant in our nephew's life. And for the first time, I understood that this might mean making difficult, irreversible decisions that had nothing to do with waiting patiently for my wife to remember she loved us. That night, after Jax was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and began to make notes, not about confrontation or reconciliation, but about practical logistics, our complex financial architecture, Ether's operational continuity, the legal parameters of separation, what it would cost financially and emotionally to dismantle a life and build something new from its components. For 15 years, I had defined myself as one half of a binary system, Raiden and Catherine, a partnership, and us. Now I needed to consider the possibility of being simply Raiden, an engineer, a CEO, an uncle, a man rebooting the system. The thought was terrifying. It was also, in some deep, quiet place I was only beginning to access, strangely liberating. 3 weeks after Catherine left, her business trip officially over, I received the text I'd been both dreading and expecting. Need to extend trip. Some complications with the client acquisition. We'll explain everything when I'm back. Give Jay extra encouragement. Love you both. I stared at the message, noting the careful vagueness, the lack of details that might be verified or challenged. Had she planned this extension all along? Or had something changed in Singapore? Had Silas met her intellectual expectations, exceeded them, or was she already discovering that escape carried its own kind of isolation? I didn't reply. What was there to say? I know you're lying. I know you're with him. Come home and explain yourself to our nephew. Or worse, I miss you. I need you. Please come back and we'll pretend this never happened. Instead, I set the phone down and went to check on Jax, who was working on his code at his desk. 3 weeks of maintaining the fiction that everything was normal had taken its toll. I was sleeping poorly, losing focus, going through the motions of work and parenting with a mechanical precision that felt nothing like living. Uncle Raiden, Jax looked up from his dual monitors. Are you okay? You're doing that over-analyzing thing again. I blinked, realizing I'd been standing in the doorway watching him without really seeing him. Just thinking about the next phase of your project. How's the code coming? It's recursion, he said, as if this explained everything. Ah, the eternal challenge. I moved to sit beside him, grateful for the concrete problem to focus on. Let me see. For the next 20 minutes, we worked through an infinite loop together, and I felt almost normal, an engineer helping his apprentice. Nothing more complicated than that. But as Jax completed the last line of the fix, his expression grew serious. Is Auntie Catherine really still coming back next week? Because the National Robotics Team tryouts are coming up, and they need a solid commitment from all my guardians. I hesitated, caught between the truth and the lie I'd been maintaining. I think Auntie Catherine might need to stay a bit longer in Asia for her work, but I can handle the commitment requirements for the team. Jax's lower lip trembled slightly. It's been too long since she left. Does she miss us? Because if she missed us a lot, wouldn't she abort the mission and come home? The question cut straight to the heart of what I'd been avoiding. How to explain to a 15-year-old that missing someone isn't always enough. That adults sometimes make choices that hurt the people they love without intending to. That his guardian was currently deciding whether the system she'd built with us was the one she wanted to keep. I think, I said carefully, that your Auntie Catherine loves you very much. And sometimes grown-ups have complicated protocols that are hard to explain. Like when your CPU load is 100%, and you're trying to choose between two equally critical processes. Exactly like that, he agreed. I brushed his hair back from his forehead, marveling at how he could distill complex emotional truths to their essence. How about we get those extra-large pizzas you like for dinner? Later that night, after Jax was finally asleep, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back deck, staring at the small square of city where the neon signs flickered, unused now that the loft was high above the action. Like so many things in our home, it was a marker of time passing, of phases completed, of small system errors accumulated alongside joys. The second glass of wine hit harder than the first. By the third, I was moving through the house with restless energy, unable to settle. In our bedroom, still technically our bedroom, though I'd been sleeping in the guest room, I stood before Catherine's closet, sliding my hand along the hanging clothes she'd left behind. Each garment triggered a memory: the white power suit she'd worn to the Ether IPO, the soft cashmere sweater she put on when she was focused, the expensive tailored jeans from when we'd renovated the loft 2 years ago. The rage, when it finally came, arrived without warning, a sudden, overwhelming urge to tear these artifacts from their hangers, to destroy the evidence of a shared life that might no longer exist. My hands shook as I gripped a silky blouse, one she'd worn to Jax's last robotics demonstration. For a moment, I thought I might actually rip it to shreds. Instead, I sank to the floor, the blouse still clutched in my fist, and let myself feel everything I'd been suppressing for 3 weeks. The corrupting hurt, the burning anger, the algorithmic humiliation of being left behind while she explored what was possible with another man. The fear that our entire partnership had been built on my willingness to ignore her structural flaws. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually the storm passed, leaving an unexpected clarity in its wake. I folded the blouse carefully and returned it to its hanger. Then I went to Jax's room and stood in the doorway, watching him sleep. One arm flung above his head, his breathing deep and even, utterly trusting that when he woke, his world would be as he'd left it. In that moment, looking at my nephew, I made my decision. I would not wait for Catherine to determine our fate. I would not sit passively while she decided whether our life together was enough for her. I would not allow Jax to see me diminished by betrayal, afraid of change, desperate for his guardian's return. Instead, I would take control of the core system. I would build something new for Jax and me, something stable and honest, defined by choice rather than inertia. And when Catherine finally returned, she would find not a husband waiting to forgive or condemn, but a man who had already re-architected the entire environment. The next morning, I called Maya. "I need to talk," I said when she answered. "Not at Ether. Somewhere private. And bring a non-disclosure agreement." 3 hours later, we sat in her hyper-modern, soundproof condo, mugs of strong coffee between us. I told her everything. The affair with Silas Thorne, the trip to Singapore, the data transfers, the simmering anger, and the sudden, surgical clarity. Maya listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to sympathy to something fiercer and more professional. "What are you going to do?" she asked when I finished, tapping a rhythm on the table. "I'm going to liquidate our joint assets," I said. The words felt strange, but correct in my mouth. "I'm going to secure a majority share of the old Archway data center outside the city, a place with enough capacity to run a whole new operation. Somewhere without the psychic residue of Catherine in every room." Maya nodded slowly. "And when Catherine comes back, because she will, Raiden, people like her always do once the fantasy of pure theory collides with corporate reality. Then she'll find her entire environmental profile gone." I took a breath, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "She'll have to decide if she wants to be part of our rebooted system, but it will be on my terms, with new security protocols." "That's," Maya paused, considering. "That's actually kind of a brutal, high-leverage move, Raiden Miller." I smiled faintly. "It doesn't feel brutal. It feels like system restoration. Jax deserves better than an anchor who's waiting for his guardian to choose us. And I deserve better than wondering every day if today's the day Catherine decides we're sufficient for her intellectual needs." Maya's eyes softened. "Yes," she said simply. "You do." Over the next hour, we sketched out a rough tactical plan. I would initiate the sale of the loft and the transfer of its proceeds into a trust for Jax. I would consult a lawyer about a legal separation agreement that protected Ether and Jax's stability above all else. Most importantly, I would use the leverage I had inadvertently gained, the missing data and her affair with a rival, to build a strategic counter-strike. "The one thing she won't expect is a preemptive strike," Maya stated. "She assumes you'll be waiting, heartbroken. You need to hit her where she lives, her professional reputation and her legacy." "I need to know what she took," I said, my gaze hardening. and why she needed Silas to do it. The key to revenge isn't anger, Raiden, Maya advised, her voice low. It's perfect, cold logic. You're an engineer. Think of this as the final, most satisfying debugging session of your life. The relocation and the trap. Over the next month, everything moved with the speed and precision of an automated script. The loft went on the market and sold in 3 days. I secured the Archway Data Center, a massive, abandoned facility I immediately began renovating into Ether's future headquarters. Each night, I sorted through our possessions, making 3 piles: retain, archive, discard. 1 month after Catherine left, I sat in the almost empty loft and wrote her a letter, explaining my decision. Not an accusation or a plea, but a clear, dispassionate account of what I'd discovered and what the new system parameters would be. The address of our new, undisclosed location, details about Jax's new tutoring schedule, the name of my lawyer. I'm not doing this to punish you, I wrote in conclusion. I'm doing it because I've spent too many years waiting for you to be content, for you to be fully present, for you to choose us definitively. I don't want Jax to learn that waiting for someone else's approval is how you build a life. I don't want to teach him that love means constantly accommodating another person's intellectual restlessness. We will be available when you are ready to talk, but we won't be waiting here. The system has been purged and rebooted. I sealed the letter and left it with the building manager, Mr. Peterson, with instructions to give it to Catherine 24 hours after she physically returned to the building. Then I picked up Jax from his last day at his old school, and we drove to the new data center complex, a vast, isolated facility that felt both secure and strangely calming. Do you think we can run a liquid-cooled server bank here? Jax asked as the city receded behind us. Probably, I said. We'll have to engineer that solution together. The confrontation and the revelation. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I was reviewing the facility's power grid schematics when my phone rang. Catherine's name appeared on the screen. The loft is gone, Catherine's voice, raw with outrage, burst through the phone. Peterson gave me your letter. How could you just? Where's Jax? Where are you? You have no right. We're safe. We're settling in. Jax is thriving with his new tutors, I interrupted, my voice flat, devoid of emotional frequency. You left first, Catherine. You disappeared with your rival. You lied about your location and your intentions. You forfeited the right to be consulted about the architectural changes made in your absence. Another silence, this one heavier. I was coming back, she finally said, her voice small. I always intended to come back. To what, Catherine? To the life you were so desperate to escape that you lied to your family and your board. Was a month with Silas enough to satisfy your curiosity about the 0-day vulnerability he promised? Or did you need more time to execute your corporate theft? The last 2 words were the trigger. A sharp intake of breath on her end. What are you talking about? I know about the missing Ether schematics and the crypto transfer to the offshore account. I know you were selling our company's future to Silas Thorne, using your institute project as cover. Tell me, Catherine, was the thrill of the intellectual heist worth destroying everything we built? The line went silent for a full 10 seconds. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You read my private files. I debugged the system, Catherine. And I found the malware at the core. I want to see Jax, she finally demanded, anger replacing shock. You can't keep him from me. I never intended to. This is his new home. You can visit here, on my terms, with a non-disclosure agreement and supervised access. We'll work out a schedule that prioritizes his stability. But I need to know why. Why take the schematics? I needed leverage, she confessed, the word a bitter pill. I felt trapped, Raiden. Our life was perfect, yes, but it was your perfect. I wanted to build something that was purely mine. Silas offered me a way to disrupt the entire market and secure my legacy outside your shadow. The schematics were the price of admission. You chose a competitor's legacy over our family's security. That's your decision. Now face the consequences. Consequences. She spat. What consequences? You can't tell the board. You can't tell the press. The loss of the schematics is an internal security issue that would crater Ether's stock. It will destroy your legacy too. I smiled, a slow, cold realization dawning in my face. That's what Silas told you, isn't it? That I couldn't risk the optics. You still don't understand, Catherine. You were never my primary concern. Ether's continuity is. And that's why I'm filing the report right now. Report? What report? The one detailing how Silas Thorne, the CEO of your main competitor, was caught trying to acquire stolen proprietary data from a trusted source, your wife, and that I, as Ether's CEO, have been working with a specialized external forensics team for the past month to track the breach and ensure corporate integrity. But I didn't know you were tracking me. I was supposed to be the inside source. You were. But you made a mistake. You took the data before your insurance policy was secured. While you were in Singapore, my team uploaded a ghost copy of the schematics, a fully functional, but time-delayed, malicious version, into Silas's network. He's already using them, isn't he? Running them through his systems for his next big announcement. I paused, letting the cold truth sink in. The zero-day vulnerability he promised you. It wasn't a flaw in the system. It was the system itself. Raiden, what have you done? Her voice was a terrified gasp. I initiated a hard reset, I said calmly. When my team hits the activation sequence in 20 minutes, the malicious schematics will execute a command. Wipe every database on Silas Thorne's network, including his flagship security platform, his client list, and any copies of the data he thinks he bought from you. He will be exposed as a fraud, and his company will be decimated. You're committing a corporate terror attack. No, Catherine, I am defending my property from a malicious attacker. Your part in the conspiracy will be revealed only to the legal authorities, who will be waiting when you land. I've already secured a deal, full custody of Jax and a guarantee that you will never again work in a position of public trust. Your name will be removed from the Ether legacy, but you will avoid prison, a small act of mercy for the sake of our nephew's peace of mind. Silas pays the full price. I heard her start to cry, a sharp, gasping sound that did not move me. You engineered this whole thing. No. You initiated the vulnerability. I simply provided the patch, a highly lethal, self-propagating patch that eliminated the threat and secured the asset. The best decisions usually involve a calculated risk and a complete understanding of the opposing system's flaw. Goodbye, Catherine. I hung up the phone and walked into the main control room of the Archway Data Center. Maya looked up from the master console, her expression grave. 20 minutes, Raiden, she confirmed. Execution sequence is ready. Target: Silas Thorne's core server farm. I nodded, watching the countdown timer flash in stark red. I wasn't the man Catherine had left behind. That version of Raiden Miller, accommodating, conflict avoidant, defined by his role as a husband, had been dismantled along with our loft. The man who remained was a pure strategist, defined not by betrayal, but by absolute, decisive action. 15 minutes later, I stood at the large window, watching the sunset paint the distant, desolate desert landscape. My phone chimed with a notification from the Securities and Exchange Commission, a brief news alert detailing a massive, coordinated system failure at Silas Thorne's company. The hard reset was complete. I walked into the adjoining room where Jax was quietly building a new robotic chassis. He looked up, his face serious. "Uncle Raiden, is Auntie Catherine going to be okay?" "She'll be fine, Jax," I said, kneeling beside him, my voice finally softening. "She's starting a new life where she can focus on what she really needs. And we are starting ours. What do you say we rename this place? The Ether Citadel." Jax smiled, a genuine, brilliant flash of 15-year-old certainty. "I like it, Uncle Raiden. Strong and secure." "Strong and secure," I agreed, watching the sunset. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't what I'd planned. But as I watched the desert sky bleed into darkness, I recognized it for what it was. A clean, defensible system, rooted in a terrifying, yet complete, new kind of freedom. When Catherine secretly traveled with her lover to execute a corporate betrayal, she returned to find our life gone and her rival annihilated. What she couldn't have known was that her departure had given me the intellectual permission to finally become the apex predator I was meant to be. The ultimate architect of contingency.